Okie dokie, everyone. We will wait a couple minutes for any stragglers to come in, and then we'll get started. Okay, it's 6:02, so as people are coming in, I'll kind of start with our introduction. So hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Zoom webinar that's being produced by the Honors College at West Virginia University. This event is the 8th Honoring Diversity lecture taking place this semester. My name's Savannah Mead, and I am the graduate assistant in the Honors College. Tonight's session is entitled Inclusive Language and Microaggressions, Recognition and Responsibility. The session will be presented by Dr. Angela Cartwright, the Director of Diversity Initiatives and Community Engagement in the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Tonight, we're going to follow the standard Zoom webinar format. So after the presentation, we will host an open question and answer session. And since we're using the Zoom webinar platform, before we begin, let me review some of the features that will help you experience this evening's lecture in the best way possible. If you have any issues with audio or video at any point during the webinar, be sure to check your personal Zoom settings and your computer's volume controls. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Due to enhanced security protocols, webinar attendees will not be able to see other questions, only their own. So to ask a question, you must click on the Q&A button, a separate screen will appear, and then you may type your question. The presenter will answer all of your questions live at the end of the presentation, or they'll get typed in. If live captioning has been requested, it can be viewed by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If live captioning was not requested, a captioned version will be available at honors.wvu.edu. And so now let's get started with this evening's lecture. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Dr. Cartwright, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much. Was I successful?
Yes.
Yay! Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm really thrilled to be able to be with you this evening. I am going to ask for your forgiveness in advance for not turning my screen on. I'm a little bit under the weather today, but I was too excited to not be here tonight. So I just appreciate your grace on that and look forward to having a great chat with you. So this format is a little bit different than the ones that we normally do because we won't be interacting during. So I may stop and ask you a question, and then it may take me a second to realize that you are unable to answer me. When that happens, I'm so sorry. Please feel free to just if well, you can't even remind me. So we'll just muddle through it together. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be doing that with you all this evening. So while we get started tonight, just want to kind of set some kind of parameters and set expectations, right? The language that we use when we speak about diversity and inclusivity and equity, the language matters. And I know that language matters in all contexts. And I think that particularly when we're in an academic community, we understand the power of naming and framing the work that we do. And I think that particularly those of us who work with humans and have actual individual people as part of the work that we do, we understand really that it matters the way we talk about those things because they're actually people. Each of the data points is a person. So this training will act as a point of reference for the ways in which we communicate, but it will not provide a do this, don't do this kind of thing. It's a framework that you can build your own practices on. So what we want to do is have a conversation that allows for you to kind of develop your own flexible framework that's empowering and respectful, based around some generalities and ideas that we will discuss this evening. Before we get any further in, I do want to do some myth busting at first. So a lot of times there are some questions when we come into an equity session. So some folks say, well, people are really sensitive. I don't understand why now suddenly we have to have all these conversations. And some folks say things like, well, aren't there more important issues for us to be discussing? And, that's a valid comment that there are a lot of important things going on here in the world. But we do want to kind of make sure that we remember that the most important thing that we do is interact with our colleagues and our students and our peers in ways that make their time at WVU successful. And we kind of like to remind folks that what we're talking about isn't actually new, right? That many of us who went to pre-K or kindergarten, some of the first things that we learned in, those first social settings that we entered were that you can't be mean to people on purpose, right? You can't hurt people on purpose. And if you do accidentally make an error and someone gets hurt, you apologize and try to be better, right? And so it's weird to me that like it's 2024 and we as grown-ups have to be reminded of things that probably very young children could remind us of, right? And so I just want to set the stage that what we're talking about here is really kind of pushing back on the idea that it's okay to be harmful with our words in the first place, right? This is an old lesson. We're just kind of relearning it for ourselves as grown-ups now. So when we talk about inclusive language, what does that mean, right? And I generally like to say inclusive language is language that opens the doors, right? It's language that makes sure that everyone has access and opportunity and that their voices are heard and that they can participate. So certainly inclusive language is language that includes rather than excludes, right? So we are certainly not going to use language that is derogatory or that indicates in some way that we think some folks are unwelcome, overtly making those messages, right? But it goes a little further than that, in that inclusive language acknowledges that we're not all the same. We're all very different. Each of us has a unique set of life experiences that give us the perspectives that we carry around with us, and that none of us is the same. And so inclusive language is language that acknowledges that. It doesn't make anyone feel pressured to cover or hide who they are in order to be welcomed, in order for the door to be opened. We don't have to change who we are for the door to be opened to us. And it's language that welcomes folks. It's not just leaving the door open and saying, good luck, hope you figure it out, right? It's language that says, come on in. We understand that you have a new perspective that can really help us, and we are excited to hear about it, right? So when we talk about inclusive language, kind of just picture a situation like the one on the screen where there's a door, right? Is the door open for anyone who needs access to come in and get what they need? Is the door closed? Is there someone welcoming you at the door? And those are the kinds of feelings that we want to kind of evoke when we talk about inclusive language, because what we're really talking about is access, right? Access to the things that members of our WVU community need to be successful in their roles as faculty, staff, or students. So we discussed that we're not going to get like a to-do list or a don't-do list, right? Because, and we'll talk about why that is momentarily, but so we generally try to say, oh, and just as a disclaimer, when I say we, I don't always just mean like my colleagues in the division. I mean, in the literature around this kind of academic discipline of equity and inclusion. Um, One of the things that we would say to kind of cover many things is be authentic, right? So be authentic. And we say that because it does not matter how many good intentions we as individuals have, right? No human is perfect. And so all humans will miss the mark sometimes. And this is particularly true when we are interacting with perspectives or experiences that we personally have not had, right? And that just stems from a lack of knowledge, right? Most of the time, these errors are not intentional or malicious. These errors are just down to a lack of knowledge. And so that authenticity aspect is actually really important because that authenticity allows us to move into a space humbly and with the understanding that we don't know all of the things that there may be to know about this situation or perspective or experience, that we always have something to learn, that when we miss the mark, that we will authentically own that, and move forward in being better. Kind of how we learned in pre-K or kindergarten, right? That when we miss the mark, we make amends and we do better going forward, right? So some of the ways that we recommend approaching our communications and collaborations authentically would be to use people first language instead of identity first language. And that has generally been kind of the recommendation. But I will say that sometimes in some instances, that is now no longer the recommendation. And we'll unpack that a little bit to kind of understand what that means. So when we talk about people first language, we're talking about the way we order the words that we use when we describe someone or something, right? So I know you can't see me, but if you could, and you were telling someone about, oh, you know, I went to the Honoring Diversity series last night, and this white woman with a disability was doing the session. So while that would be accurate, does all of that information necessarily impact the experience? And I say, when I ask that question, I mean, does it really matter, right? Does it matter that I'm a white woman with a disability? And I say that to say a lot of times we provide additional information that is not necessary. And when we do that, we want to make sure that we're framing it in a way that focuses on the person and how they want to be framed, right? And I know that, you know, many of us, all of us, have several different facets to our identities. And some of them are very important to us and very significant. And others play more of a supporting role. And we have an idea of how we would like to be perceived when we move around in the world. And so this recommendation toward people first language is a way to honor that, right? That we would say, so instead of saying disabled woman, you might say a woman with a disability. That would be people first, woman, right? That's me as a person, not particularly focusing on one aspect of my identity that tends to appear in a hierarchy. Now, in just the last year, really, we're starting to get, you know, as you include more voices in conversations, you get new insights, right? Because those new voices are sharing perspectives that had not been included before. And so we're seeing relatively recently, we're seeing that some communities are requesting that they not be addressed with people first language, but instead the identity characteristic that they're referring to, this part of themselves is so intrinsic to the way that they move in the world and perceive the world. It's like a lens through which everything else goes, that without that, they will be a different person. And so several times we hear from a couple of communities in particular that while people first language is certainly not problematic. In some instances, identity first language would be preferable. And those communities tend to be folks who identify as neurodivergent or deaf. And so the explanation that they provide is that these aspects of who they are such a significant lens in the way they experience the world that they cannot be separated from this aspect of their identity. And we kind of have this idea generally in our zeitgeist that the lenses that you look through things at will change what you see, right? Like, people talk about wearing rose-colored glasses, right? That what's out there isn't changing, but the glasses you put on make it seem better. And I see this all the time when I get a new pair of sunnies. Like I put them on and I look at the sky and it's this gorgeous color. I'm like, oh my goodness, what a lovely day. And then I take them off and it's not actually that remarkable, right? The lenses, whatever it is that filters what we experience in the world, changes what we see and how we experience it. And so the argument for identity first language in certain contexts is that, in fact, some of these identities are so intrinsic and integral to a person's sense of self that they cannot be separated. And I understand at this point, I would normally like ask for some questions, check in, see how we are. So please do feel free to pop stuff in the Q&A. And when we get those, I will absolutely be happy to go back. And we can look at other ways to kind of new examples or ways that we could discuss some things that are not hitting right away this first time through, okay? So why is it that I said, well, we used to say this, but now we say this in these particular contexts? And, realistically, that's just kind of how all language is fluid, right? It's moving, it's evolving, it's flowing. There aren't a lot of hard lines on it because it changes over space and time and interaction. All language is fluid, particularly when we're talking about the connotation of words, right? So the denotation usually stays the same, but the connotation, how it's understood when used in popular language, can change pretty rapidly. And different people have different preferences, right? Different experiences make us see the world in different ways. And so kind of think about it like this, that, we can all be donuts sitting in the same box together, right? We're all donuts, but we're all having really different experiences. Like I bet the cake donut that's not glazed and doesn't have any filling or frosting or anything on it, I just feel like that donut probably doesn't have the same experience that maybe the filled, frosted, and sprinkled donut has, right? They're just two different donuts. They're both donuts, but they're having different experiences. And I know that that sounds whimsical, but I think it's really important for us to remember that the things we're talking about here aren't really unusual. That these are concepts that when we apply them outside of the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, they generally don't tend to, they generally are a little more well understood. And so we try to make those parallels that, we understand that people have different experiences and they like different things, right? And one of the things that we like to remind ourselves of is that people can be members of a particular identity group, but have had very different experiences that lead them to perceive things in different ways, and thus they will have different preferences. So now that we've laid the foundation for they can all be donuts, but all be very different, we'll take it into the less whimsical, more actual discussion. And for this one, I'd like to kind of talk about the way in which one aspect of identity has changed the way we talk about it over time. So we have, are you familiar? You can't answer. The word Hispanic, right? If I say Hispanic, folks probably have a ballpark idea of what that word means, because they see it on a lot of forms, right? Particularly like government forms or financial forms. However, defining it is generally tricky for most folks. And that's because, in combination with a variety of reasons, it's an old word, right? It's an old word that was given to a community that did not choose that word, right? So this word really symbolizes the history of colonization. And so when we started receiving more voices in the conversation around this term, in the 1990s, we saw a trend away from the term Hispanic, and it was replaced with Latino, Latina, to refer to folks of Latin American descent. And that was because Hispanic is not a term that was chosen by the community, but Latino, Latina would be a term chosen by the community. So that was kind of the first evolution that we saw there. But evolution doesn't stop, right? And so the more voices that we had join the conversation kind of pointed out that Latino, Latina is great, but what if one identifies as non-binary? It can be difficult to find oneself in that nomenclature if one identifies as non-binary. And so we see the development of the term Latinx to refer to what was previously the Latino Latina community. And so that made a lot of space for folks who did not necessarily see themselves in that dichotomous linguistic structure. However, then we see some pushback to Latinx because Spanish, being a Romance language, has gendered nouns. All of the nouns have genders. The donuts would have a gender, the box that they're in would have a gender, right? And so because language is such a significant part of culture, some folks in the community were concerned that by erasing that aspect of their linguistic culture, that it was having a negative impact, like erasing the culture, that there was a risk, particularly that folks would lose touch with that aspect of their culture if we moved away from Latino, Latina and to Latinx. So then there was kind of this discussion like, oh, okay, and when I say discussion, I mean, academic debate discussion, but also really leaning on the insight of scholars and academics who are members of the community. And so now what we see, there's a new term that's now gaining prevalence, and it's Latine, which is Latine, Latine. And so that addressed the some of the concerns that appeared in the evolution, but then some of them remain, right? And I find this particular example pretty helpful in describing how there's a generational difference, how intersectionality and the ways that different aspects of our identity interact with other aspects of our identity can sometimes give us these different experiences and perspectives that would make us feel more comfortable with certain ways of being spoken to and referred to, more comfortable with certain ways than with other ways. And I hope that tracks. And if it doesn't, just flag me down when we get to the Q&A and we'll come right back to it. So you may be thinking like, okay, I get it. It's fluid and it's not monolithic, that not every member of every community feels the same way and wants the same thing. So that's great, Angel. I get that. But what am I supposed to do with this information? Like, how do I move forward to make sure that my communication and collaboration is inclusive and effective? Well, just ask, right? And I know that sounds overly simplistic, but it's actually not that bad, right? Just ask. And as much as you can, be open to being informed about new things, right? So when possible, ask, how would you like to be addressed? And if you shoot your best shot and you miss the mark and someone is compassionate enough to give you some additional information, thank them and onboard that and move on, right? It's always this constant process of learning. And it really can be as easy as including your pronouns on your screen names, in your email signatures. When you meet someone, it's pretty easy to say, hi, I'm Angel and I use she, her pronouns. How would you like me to address you today? Um, and is everyone going to have a preference on this? Certainly no. But might some of your colleagues and students have a preference on this? Certainly. And so we try to normalize the process of finding out how people see themselves and how they want us to see them, right? And so it can feel a little cumbersome because we're not used to doing it on a regular basis. And this is one that I'm working on myself, as because you can't tell, can't see me, but I'm a middle-aged woman. I turned 43 this week. And so I am unlearning some things that because of my age are not as helpful anymore. And so I'm working on, hello, my name is, and these are my pronouns. How should I address you when I meet new folks? And that's why I try to make sure that they're always included in my screen names and in my email signatures. So we talked about pronouns a little bit with inclusive language because that is one area in which we tend to see some exclusionary language taking place. Another area where we tend to see some discriminatory language without ill intent usually is in the area of ableism, which is discrimination against anyone with a physical or mental disability. And we have the way our language has evolved, particularly the way we use it in popular culture and in communication, conversational communication, there can be several problematic aspects kind of baked in there, if you will. And this is particularly true around disabilities. And really particularly true around folks with a mental disability. And so just kind of think about the unintentional but still there message that is conveyed when we say something like turning a blind eye to the problem. You know, when we say someone is turning a blind eye to the problem, we're essentially saying they are ignoring it, right? And it's as a negative, right? And it's creating this hierarchy. So there are kind of several things there, right? We're mischaracterizing what blindness even is. We're framing it as the negative response to something. So blindness is equated with negativity. And then there's a hierarchy of, well, obviously seeing it and doing something will be better than not seeing it. And so we see this a lot with we kind of toss around these words like, oh my goodness, she's so OCD. And we use these words really cavalierly without kind of taking into account the fact that these are real concerns that can have a significant impact on the lives of the people with whom we interact on a regular basis. And so when we're moving through our communications and collaborations, one of the things that I would ask you to hang on your framework alongside of considering person first versus identity first language would be think about what implicit hierarchies, this is better than this, are being reinforced in the things that we say. Think about what is being portrayed as negative, right? If we're using a word that could describe a person, but we're using it to connotate a negative association, we should be aware of that. That should be something that's on our framework for us to think about and consider. So inclusive language, we do need to be intentional about it. And some of the ways that our language is exclusionary can be classed as microaggressive. So a microaggression is a statement, action, or incident that is either indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination. And we'll talk a little bit about like kind of the difference between parsing out some of those bits of the definition. But I did want to put kind of just this image to kind of help us understand that micro, we tend to think micro, oh, so small, so little, so cute, so unimportant. But like when we look at like the concept of a microprocessor, right? These things are powerful. They are small, right? But they're powerful and they run the world that we live in, right? And so just because something is micro or can seem small in one way doesn't necessarily mean that it's inconsequential. And so we'll talk about three common types of microaggressions, and then we can unpack those a little bit more in the Q&A. So you may be wondering, why, Angel, is there a jumbo shrimp on the screen right now? I am interested in where you're going with this. Well, I'm so glad. Jumbo shrimp is an oxymoron, right? And I think that the term microaggression in and of itself could kind of be a little bit oxymoronic, if you will, but I definitely think that the first type of microaggression that we're going to talk about today is certainly an oxymoron. That first type of microaggression we're talking about today is a micro assault. And I think that that sounds, it's pretty clear why that's oxymoronic, because an assault is certainly intentional, right? So this isn't unintentional. And assault tends to be a kind of big deal, right? Like that's a no-no. But they're classed as micro assaults because they tend to happen in ways that are anonymous. So they are on purpose, but they're anonymous, and therefore they tend to be difficult to follow up on or to address, right? And so an example of a micro assault would be writing derogatory words in public spaces. It might be putting a discriminatory symbol in a public place. The for a good time call message in anywhere and listing a real person's real phone number. That's certainly harmful, right? That's certainly aggressive. It's an assault on that person, but it is done in a cowardly way so that there's no real recompense, right? It's just this thing that's out there. And so in that way, it is indirect, although it is certainly intentional. We also have another kind of microaggression, which is the micro insult. So the micro insult is when someone says something to someone else and they intend it to be a compliment. But what they're really showing us is kind of a negative perception of a member of a community of which we are a member, right? And so this slide, an example of micro insult would be, oh, you're such a good driver for a woman. And that certainly they think they're telling you that you have an extraordinary skill level in handling your motor vehicle. But what they're really saying is, I generally have a prejudice against women drivers. Like I have a stereotype about women drivers. So this slide, I kind of was a little bit shocked, but not surprised. When I was looking for images for this slide, I typed into when you make a slide deck, you can choose images from several locations, but like the easiest ones to put in are the ones that PowerPoint has for you, right? So I typed in driving, and these are a lot of the photos I had. And so it's a lot of women driving badly, right? And then there are other layers to this. Like, for example, you will notice that all of these women appear to have light skin, right? And so we can talk about assumptions of whiteness in a different conversation. But it is important, the things that we the pictures that we have in our mind, they sometimes come out in our words. And so we really want to think about the kind of assumptions that we're making, right? And an assumption that most women are bad drivers is a negative one. And so despite the fact that we may feel like we're saying something kind to someone, is not necessarily going to make it not hurtful, right? And our third type of microaggression that we're going to talk about today is the microinvalidation. And I personally believe that this is one of the more insidious forms of microaggression. Let me talk about what it is, and you can kind of tell me if you think that I'm on the right track. So a microinvalidation is when someone has experienced a microaggression or discrimination of some kind, and they go to a trusted person to share that experience with. And that person kind of downplays it. And let me be really clear about why that can sometimes happen, right? That sometimes happens because we care about someone and we don't ever want them to feel negatively. So I'm going to give you an example from my own life, and I think that will maybe help flesh this out a little bit better. My husband is British Asian, and we were having, very shortly after we moved back to the US, we were having dinner in Morgantown, and we happened to be having dinner with another couple. And I and the other couple both pass as white, and my husband does not. And so the server took my order and took the order of the other couple and then walked away without taking my husband's order. And there was just this silence at our table. And my husband kind of, leans over and quietly says in my ear, like, did that just happen? Now, I love my husband, and I never want him to feel anything other than the wonderful, amazing human that he is. And in my desire to comfort him, I might have been tempted to say something like, oh, no, I'm sure that's not it. I'm sure, it's something else that's not that, right? But if I had said that to my husband, it wouldn't have been what I was trying to convey, but it's entirely possible that what he would have taken from that interaction was that I didn't see him, or I didn't understand the experience that he was having, or that I didn't think it was an important experience. And so that kind of takes us to this concept of intent versus impact, right? Many times when we use exclusionary language or we commit a microaggression, that's not the intent, right? The intent is not to cause harm, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the impact isn't still the same. And so when we look at this image, we can say probably with 98, 99% certainty that it was never the intent for that car to hit that tree, but it doesn't change the damage caused by the impact itself, right? Intent doesn't actually determine the level of harm. The impact determines the level of harm. And so I would ask that you would put that on your framework when you're navigating how to have inclusive and effective communications and collaborations. Remember that microaggressions can happen at any time, that we all have these gaps in perception that may lead us to say something that we don't intend to be harmful, but that it is in fact harmful. The intent and the impact are different. And that when someone is gracious enough to us to point out that, hey, I understand that this may not have been your intention, but this is the impact, that we receive that in a way that allows us to grow from it. So what is it that makes us susceptible to committing microaggressions, right? And really, they're the same things that would make us more likely to not be the best version of ourselves in any other context, right? So we think about the common things that make us less than our best selves, like examples of less than our best selves. Maybe our best self when we are driving in traffic, our best self is very calm and listening to some music that we like, or a podcast or an audiobook that we like. And people are driving in some kind of way, and that's fine. We're just staying in our lane, getting where we're going. But then other times we are not our best selves. And sometimes when someone drives in some kind of way, we may have some thoughts about it, and we may express those thoughts by pushing our horn or shouting things or making gestures, right? So when I say, we are more likely to commit a microaggression when we are not our best selves. It's really the same as any of these other times we're not our best selves, right? And we have a couple of things that we try to remind folks, hey, here's your warning. If you're feeling any of these kinds of ways, be aware that you may not be your best self right now. And we use the HALT acronym. If you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you probably aren't going to be your best self, right? And there are certainly more things that would go into this, like ambiguous evidence. Maybe you don't have enough information to make a choice that you need to make, and so you're doing your best, but you miss the mark. If you are faced with like cognitive overload, or a complex maybe decision that you need to make, and there are several moving pieces, it can be difficult to keep them all where you want them to be, and that could put us in that warning area. If we are afraid, or if we are running short on time, like any of these very normal experiences that go along with hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, can put us in a zone where we are likely to make an error because we're not our best selves at that moment. So what do we do when we see that there is a microaggression, right? How do we bring attention to that in a productive way that makes people have a light bulb moment, as opposed to having a resistant negative reaction that kind of kills the conversation? So I would say, on your framework, hang this idea that I picked up when I taught high school. I taught high school for a decade while I was in grad school. And I learned pretty quickly teaching high school that folks will double down on a bad choice in order to save face. Now, is this 100%? No, certainly not. But in general, we could say that many folks, particularly adolescents, right, may double down on a bad choice in order to save face. And so I learned that it's not really productive to ask a student to address a student's misbehavior and call them out for off-task behavior or disruptive behaviors in front of the rest of the class, because that tends to create a situation where they have to decide whether to save face in front of all of their peers or get in more trouble, right? And so I learned pretty quickly that I had better success with my students who were off task and disruptive if I asked them to meet me outside in the hallway. Say, hey, why don't you take a minute, go wait for me in the hallway, stand against the wall so I can see you through the window and the door. Then I get the rest of the class working on something. And then I would step into the hallway and stay where I could see in the door. And just say, hey, this isn't like you. What's up? You okay? Like, is there anything I can help you with? And usually with that approach, the student would tell me what was going on that was making them not their best self. Sometimes I could offer assistance or refer someone to assistance. Sometimes I couldn't, right? There are certainly situations that we really can't change for folks, but just the ability to share it with someone can sometimes make it feel less heavy. And so I share that experience from my teaching, my high school teaching career, um, to kind of frame what I'm about to say here, right? That it generally is not a good conversation starter to directly shame or scold someone, right? If you if you witness a microaggression and you kind of lean over and you're like, hey, you're an ableist and that is bad, that's kind of a conversation killer, right? What we want to do is create an opportunity to have a conversation that leads to new understanding, right? So we want to find a way to spotlight the behavior in private to facilitate those conversations that lead to new understanding. So sometimes that can be talking to that person privately, right? And at other times, if that's not really an option or it needs to be addressed sooner, we can start with things that are more like, what did you mean by that statement? I'm not sure we're on the same page. When you said that, what were you trying to convey to me, right? And a lot of times they'll be like, oh, right, that is not what I wanted to convey. I'm sorry. Sometimes that's not what happens, right? But if someone realizes that they have some room to grow and they onboard that, great, we can move on. Another way to approach it would be to say, like, I don't know if you realize this or not, but when you say things like that, it hurts my feelings, or it could hurt someone else's feelings, right? And I say to have this kind of softer approach when possible, because most people don't commit microaggressions on purpose or mean to cause harm. In fact, that's kind of the hallmark of a microaggression. If someone is doing it intentionally, i.e., you've had these softer conversations and you've tried to provide a space for a conversation that leads to new understandings, and unacceptable behaviors persist, we're probably not dealing with a microaggression anymore, right? That's an intentional and knowing that's an intentionally causing harm, knowing that you're doing that. And that's a whole different ballgame, right? And I do realize that we are getting dangerously close to my time limit. So I am just going to wrap it up so that we can get to the part that I like best, which is the talking about it so I can learn with you. I really appreciate you being here, and I feel like I've talked at you. So I'm really excited um, to have some interaction with you. And I see that Jennifer has said, can we go back over micro assault? Absolutely. Let me get us back to micro assault. Because I do think, well, no, that image isn't particularly helpful. But I don't want to put any of the images that more clearly describe it for obvious reasons. So a micro assault, it is intentional, right? It's something that someone does on purpose to be harmful, but it's indirect and anonymous, right? And I think we see this, it used to be like people graffitiing public places, but really, I think now we see a lot of this more on like anonymous social media apps like Yik Yak, where people will just say really harmful things about their peers or their colleagues. And because it's anonymous, like it's intentional, but it's indirect in such a way that means, it's difficult to address. And so it kind of just gets overlooked in some ways, because there's not a lot we can do. We certainly have mechanisms in place at WVU to deal with microaggressions and other discriminatory behaviors. But when those are anonymous, it does kind of limit our capacity to follow up on those things, right? So the micro assault is micro because it's indirect. but it's an assault because it's on purpose. And I understand that again, that's an oxymoron, and those can be a little bit weird. Can you restate the three types of microaggression in the acronym? Yes, absolutely. So our three types of microaggression are the microassault, which is indirect but intentional. Then we have the micro insult, which is generally someone thinks they're paying you a compliment, but in fact, they're just kind of indicating that in fact they have a negative perception of some aspect of you. So like one of them, I'm from West Virginia, but I moved to Ohio and did my early teaching and my degrees in Ohio. And when I first came, I heard this a lot, and I was just like, Folks would say, oh, you don't sound like you're from West Virginia. And what they thought they were saying to me was, oh, you don't have much of an accent. Or, we could take it a little bit further and say, oh, you have good grammar, or your diction is nice. Who knows how deeply that would go. But so they think they're paying me a compliment. But what they're really saying is, you don't fit the stereotype that I have about everyone else who comes from the place that you come from. They're saying, I see, your home and the people that you grew up with as not great at speaking English. And so while they're trying to pay me a compliment, they're really disparaging a whole group of folks of which I am a member. Then there's the micro invalidation. And this is when someone who has experienced some form of discrimination, microaggression or blatant discrimination, they come to someone that they trust to share that experience. Sometimes it's to share the experience. Sometimes it's to get help, right? But they come to someone that they trust to share this experience for any number of reasons. And that person, usually out of good intent, right, trying to make them feel better or avoid negative feelings, they try to downplay it or explain it away. But and that's a great intent, to make people feel good and to ease hurt. That's a good intent. But the impact tends to be that the person walks away feeling unseen or misunderstood. And it kind of is like squeezing that lemon juice onto a paper cut, it just makes it that much worse. And then the acronym we use for folks who may be in danger of not being their best selves is HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. Those are some pretty solid hints that we may not be our best selves if we're experiencing those particular emotions. Could you explain why someone might commit a micro assault on an anonymous chatting app as opposed to directly insulting them? Now, this is certainly my personal opinion, but I will go ahead and give it because I think that it's probably valid. I think they're cowards in the sense that they want to say mean things, but they don't want to be held accountable for them, right? They want to express displeasure at something, disagreement with something. They want to express negativity, but they want to do it in a way so that they're not responsible, that they don't have to face any consequences for the things that they say. If the app is anonymous, why would someone be indirect as opposed to directly coming after someone? And that, I have to be honest, I don't have any of these anonymous social media apps, but members of my team do, and they kind of keep track of some trends that we're seeing on campus. They're going after specific people directly. But the person who is posting these harmful, unkind, and sometimes threatening messages is posting it anonymously. So the target knows who they are, but they don't know who is saying these things about them. So the anonymity is on the poster, not necessarily on the topic of the post, if that makes sense. How would you acknowledge the microaggression that someone else experienced as to not commit microinvalidation? That is such a great question. I really appreciate you asking that. And it's going to sound, I think, probably like an unsatisfying answer. because it is a lot of questions. It's like a lot of questions. I'm sorry, that's like a lot of questions in these contexts, right? Um, because it depends, it's contextual. So in the example with that I shared about my own experience at a restaurant with my husband, when he said, "Did that really just happen?" I said, "Yeah, yeah, I think it did. I think I saw what you saw. How can I help you? What can I do?" And my husband said, no, we don't need to do anything about it. I just wanted to have a reality check for a moment." And I said, "Yeah, I think what you saw is what you saw. And I'm so sorry that that happened. If there's anything that I can do, let me know." Um, I offered, like, "Do you want me to say something? Do you want to leave? Like, is there something that would make this more bearable for you?" And he said no. Like, we had dinner, and when the server came back, he said, "I also would like to order." And then the server took his order and delivered his food slightly later than ours, right? We obviously have never been back. But so I think really just acknowledging, like, yes, I saw that. You are not making this up. You're not imagining things. You're not being overly sensitive. This is like a real thing that happened to you, and I'm sorry it happened. How can I support you right now? Is there anything that you would like to do about this? Right. Um, in regard to the acronym, the things included seem to be everyday occurrences in life. Yes, sleep deprivation is an unfortunate reality for a lot of people. So how can we get around this? That's such a great observation. And I think that, like, increasingly, I think we're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired more and more often, right? And I think that that awareness is really one of our best defenses against slipping into being not our best self. So, and I understand, I have been hungry, angry, lonely, and tired at the same time, and I was not my best self, right? And so I would never want to suggest that awareness would keep us from ever slipping into not our best self. But I will say that most of the time, before something comes out of my mouth, I know that it's not my best self. And so I try to be particularly aware if I'm feeling one of those things, um, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, that puts me in a zone where I might not be in my best self. I try to be extra careful. So if I know I've not gotten a good night of sleep, and I'm a chronic insomniac, so this is like real talk. Um, when I know that it's been a couple of days since I've had real sleep, I am very careful. I try to take a breath before I say anything, and I try to really think about the things that I say before I say them. Um, do I get it right every time? Absolutely not. But I'm going to keep trying because I think that that awareness and that self-awareness, and kind of being honest with ourselves about what our emotional and physiological state is at any given time and how that impacts the way we perceive others and the way we treat them is really all we can do if we can't address the underlying emotional or physiological causes of that kind of trigger warning danger zone area.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions, but if you have them, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Otherwise, you can reach out to Dr. Cartwright at angela.cartwright@mail.wvu.edu. An archived version of the webinar will be available later on the Honors College website. And we appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. Um, oh, a raised hand. Okay. if you have your question, drop it in the Q&A because I think that that's the only way that we can answer it unless you email. Okay. I'm not sure, but I will stay on just in case. But Angela, thank you so much. Oh, yes, that's totally you're so right. Due to some, like the nature of this webinar, the archived version will not be available. The recording will not be available. So um, this was a really like a one-time only type of event. But thank you so much, Angela, for your insight and for your time. We really appreciated it. I know I found that really, really interesting and very useful. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you tolerating my weird voice and no on-screenness. I will say, while it is not, a recording will not be made available, we do, this is one of several discussions that we facilitate upon request in classes, at staff meetings. So if this is something that you think, oh, I want someone to see that, or, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what else, they have to say, check out our training resources in our DEI classroom on the division's website. And there will be other opportunities to see this session with other people, and, all kinds of good stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. If you don't already, please look into DEI. They have some great resources. And Angela shared some of them with us tonight. And so thank you, everyone. Um, if you have to go, then um, oh, I'll I'll answer this question, everyone. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you, you too.